All right. So and audio is working. All right. Okay, so we will start where we left off yesterday. There are some issues with network, so I will try to organize the Ethernet cables, but if you do have Ethernet cables, please bring them together with your laptops, because the Wi-Fi here is unreliable with that amount of people, so it's good to have physical connection. We talked a little bit yesterday about the rules for the course, so the setup is such that we will run two individual assignments in the semester. They will start in about 3-4 weeks, and then there will be a project towards the end of the course, group project. So you will do a bigger amount of work towards the end. That one will be worth 25 points out of 60. So the written exam at the end is 40%, and the internal assessment is 60. The exam is not a problem. Like if you are in the course, then passing the exam should not be an issue. I mean, the exam is not easy, but it's hard to fail it, so to speak, right? But passing the internal, the 60%, that's kind of a lot of work. So you have to pay attention to the assignments and to the project. We will start by talking a little bit about the infrastructure, about what you need to run the course on. Then we will follow with introduction to Go, to programming language Golang, and we will spend 1 or 2 weeks learning the basics and learning the networking in Golang. And then we will go back to the infrastructure, and then we will talk a little bit about cloud services like Amazon and IBM Cloud. And then we will go high level to an application layer, talk about services, and then we will wrap up talking about all the little details that were kind of left off, and we will kind of brainstorm about the project. So that's more or less how the course will run this semester. We have a lot of students, so we will see how it goes with the labs and with the lectures. And because Christopher has a small kid, it's quite hard for him to be here at 8:15, so we will start at 8:30, okay? So even though in the time plan we have 8:15, we will start 15 minutes later. So that should be okay, I guess. Yeah, the lectures and the labs are split. We don't know when we will run the labs, when we will run the lectures. So for example, today is kind of a mixed session. Some Thursdays will be purely practical, so there will be no lecture, just some exercises. But we will tell you kind of in advance as we move. Sometimes we start the lecture on Wednesday and we don't finish it, so we have to spill over into Thursday. So I mean, we try to plan it, but it's really hard to plan perfectly. So sometimes, a little bit ongoing planning is needed. Okay, so I think that's about the course. Yona, I forgot anything? Yeah, the exam is electronic, multi-choice. It's a little bit different to the quiz which we had yesterday, where you could guess a lot. You cannot really guess in your exam.
Yeah, you can.
You can, yeah, but it may.
You're just unlikely to get it right.
You may backfire, yeah.
Actually, the questions are easier in the exam, right? I
mean,
the percentage questions, they're really tough to get right in the first place.
That's right,
Exactly.
that's right.
And if you guess wrong, you get minus points.
Yeah, that's right.
Probably, I don't know if you'll do that.
Oh, don't tell them that.
Yeah, we talk about it later.
So you'll get minus B.
Yeah.
Which is not the same as
B minus, yeah.
Yeah.
No, minus B. So on the other end of the scale.
Right. Yes. Minus B minus.
Oh yeah, and the participation. So there is a small amount of grading which we usually use for like bumping people above the boundary conditions in the internal portfolio. But it kind of works in your favor if you contribute to the course. And by contribute, what we mean is if you help other students answer questions on the issue tracker, if you contribute to the issue tracker, if you contribute to the wiki, if you write tutorials or update tutorials that are there, and if you participate above average for peer review. So as Christopher said yesterday, we will have assignments and projects, and you will be peer reviewing each other. You will be checking each other projects and each other assignments. And because there are 2 assignments, and each assignment requires 2 people to mark you, then on average you should give back by marking other 2 people. So if with 2 assignments and 1 project, you should be on average marking 6 things, right? So those who go above average, they have kind of an some recognition and some reward in form of a small amount of extra points which they get for the course. And those who are free riding and not marking other people, they get a small discount on those extra points, right?
That's the principle.
Yep.
Enforced contribution.
So it's all right. So how many of you are running Mac? All right. So minority, like 3 people. So most of the lectures are not for you, right? You will be fine. The actual mechanics of what we will be doing on the system will work exactly the same on your system, but how to install things and how to manage things, it's a little bit on you, right? I'm using Mac myself, so if you have any questions, you can ask me. We can chat. I'm using Brew to install the additional packages and the dependencies, which are kind of GNU compatible. So yeah, just talk to me. Most of the instructions are for Windows users or Linux users. So the instructions, like as we said yesterday, you can either run Linux in a VirtualBox, or you can try to set up a dual boot with your Windows machine. So if you can, or if you're buying a new laptop, then set up the partitions in such a way that you can have a Linux partition and Windows, and you can dual boot them. If you already have Linux and you have just single partition and you don't want to repartition your drive, that's okay. So install VirtualBox and run Linux in the VirtualBox. We do recommend running Linux natively for the reason that it just runs a little bit faster and you don't have fiddling with networking and with drivers. Like, it's easier. I mean, it's harder to set it up initially, but it's easier later to have all the things working. If you're running in a VirtualBox, you will get graphics issues, networking issues. You may have all sorts of different issues, which it's okay. I mean, issues is what we deal with, right? Computer science is all about solving issues, but
Particular inbound networking, right? So
yeah.
That was our classical problem. So if you create application servers, right, the REST service, and you want to connect from your actual host to the VM, it sometimes doesn't really work as it should be, or there's some latency issues and so on. So it's in our experience, it's desirable to actually have it run it natively as far as possible. Yeah.
That's right. So we do
There's a
recommend, yeah.
Right. Thanks for reminding me. So no, if using VM or virtual machine, VirtualBox, and so on, our experience suggests that you may often have networking-related problems. That is, you're running an application server, you're writing a REST service in Go, and you will have trouble connecting to it, for example, from your host machine, things like that. So that's why, because basically, you need to be very aware about your infrastructure and know where to debug first, right? So whereas if you run natively, it's very unlikely that you encounter such problems.
Right. So we did run. So you have one option running in VirtualBox, which I mean, you can do it, but it will carry some issues. You have another option of running it on a dual boot setup, so split your partition into 2 and run it natively, install Linux on your hard drive. And then there is a third option, which we tried last year, which is you have a memory stick, like an 8 gig or 16 gig stick. You put Linux on it, and then you boot from USB. So you don't have dual partition on your drive, but you can still do dual boot by using a stick. There are some issues with the stick. So the issue is that the Linux that you boot is kind of read-only. So you would have to, every time you install something and every time you do something, then people were observing that it actually wipes everything the moment you stop, right? Because it's like a CD drive which boots live Linux, you can use it, and then everything is wiped. Yeah? You can make it persistent, exactly. So if you make it persistent, and if you actually install a proper Linux and boot kind of a persistent setup on your USB stick, then it will work, but you have to be aware that you cannot use this USB stick as a live system. You have to use it as a persistent system. So that's exactly the solution. And if you're running USB 3, it's pretty fast. So if you buy a decent stick which has USB 3 support and you have your laptop with the USB 3, speed-wise you will be fine. It's same as your hard drive pretty much. So you should not have any issues. So that's an alternative. Remember that live system is not a good option. You need a persistent system. Yeah. All right. So what is the plan for today? And actually, we will start, but you will kind of carry on through the week to get it sort of sorted. So what we want is for you to have Linux, right? So you have to pick which option is good for you and try to get it done, right? So if you want VirtualBox, download VirtualBox and so on. We have instructions later on. Once you have Linux, we have to install Git or make sure that Git is running there. So for the Mac people, just check that you have Git running. You don't need to install Linux, right? Most of the things that we will be doing on Linux, the Mac people can actually do on Mac. So I do have VirtualBox just in case, but most of the things for that course I did natively on Mac and it's fine. So Git, and then you have to install Heroku tools, which is like a small SDK for you to deploy your software to Heroku service. Instructions will follow. Then you will clone a repository from the Heroku tutorial, build it, run it locally, and deploy it on Heroku. Once you do that, then you basically sort it, right? So you have all the necessary infrastructure on your laptop and connectivity to Heroku sorted for the course. So that's more or less the plan for today and for you to get things set up. Okay, so we had those last year as well, and we so the first part stays the same. So if you have Ubuntu with Bash, everything will be fine. You will be fine with the course. Any Linux is okay. People were asking us today which Linux you should run. We're using Ubuntu for most of the examples, and Ubuntu has a particular package management system based on dep packages. So it's kind of inherited from Debian. So the naming for packages is the same as with Debian. And they have an application called apt, and that's a kind of a utility which you use to install packages on Linux. If you go, yeah.
One thing to note is the newer versions of Ubuntu, like Ubuntu 18, will have more updated packages than, for example, Ubuntu 16. So installing certain software will be easier on the newer versions of the system, though I personally prefer the old one just because I don't like GNOME. But
yeah, so that different people have different preferences in terms of the graphical interface. And different Linux environments also have default different interfaces. You can, with a little bit of an effort, make any Linux to do any UI that you want by manually installing the one that you like. But then you have to manually kind of maintain it. So if you just want to use something out of the box, then yeah, as Jona is saying, you pick the one which has the one you like built in as a default one. But if you install particular Ubuntu and you don't like the window manager, you can install a different one. So Linux is very configurable, and you can always make it do what you want, right? The only core difference is which package management system will you use. So you have basically two families of Linux systems. One is that you have the package management, and one is kind of the rolling releases. You don't have versions of Linux, you just kind of continuously update it, right? Those two philosophies.
We'll talk about this idea more. But also, one important thing to bear in mind, don't be totally committed to using package management for software setup. Sometimes we use more recent version of packages than are available alongside Ubuntu 18, for example. So then they will give you other ways or give other instructions as to how to install the more recent versions, because we need to kind of bypass the packaging system at some stage.
Exactly. So sometimes packaging system is behind, like we need a particular version of Golang, and the one which is packaged with the package management system is the older one. Then you need to manually install the later one by following manual instructions.
We provide those. So.
Most of the time, yeah.
I think we do.
I mean, for Go, we do.
You usually provide a link to somewhere else.
Isn't that providing instruction? Well, the internet thing works with links and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah. So any Linux will be fine. Dual boot will be fine. Dual boot with USB stick will be fine. Windows with VirtualBox, fine, with some caveats. And then native Windows, like we tried it last year to actually try to run the course on Windows without Linux, and that kind of backfired. It was not really working. I mean, for some things you can use your Windows shell, especially if you're running Windows 10 with the bash support. But from last year we've observed a lot of pain in terms of running local services, servers, network connectivity, Docker. All those things were kind of either not working or really painful. So you will need to have Linux. Unless you're really hardcore dedicated to fighting your way through and you are an expert in Windows, then okay, sure, try it. But we discourage that, right? And then for people who still have Windows 8 for gaming or something, for some reasons, we also discourage you using that for this course. If you have Windows 8 plus Linux, that should be fine. Windows 10 with Linux better, right? Who is running Windows 8? Okay, no problem.
Who remembers Windows 8? Okay. One person.
Yeah, I think Microsoft dropped support for Windows 8 sometime last year.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, they forced people to update to 10. All right, so that's it. Here are the instructions of how to install Ubuntu.
So we linked the slide set. Right? Did we link it in the wiki?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, Jona knows us. He knew we give the links.
Why not? Links is like, why don't we do?
Do survey. Link to survey.
Yes, so the slides are linked. If you go to the wiki for today, the lecture 2 is set up and the lecture slides, so you will have the same slide deck as I have. All right, so you follow the instructions of installing Ubuntu. Again, as I said, if you want another Linux, go ahead. There is no strict, like we don't force you to use particular, I mean, we do force you to use Heroku. But last year people were using Google App Engine as well, although Heroku is was kind of a compulsory aspect. But like in terms of tooling, in terms of editors you use, in terms of Linux you use, and so on, you have a freedom to choose. And then the second instruction is, so if you're installing Ubuntu natively or on USB stick, you follow those instructions. If you want to do a VirtualBox setup, you follow those instructions. So download VirtualBox, download Ubuntu. So we're recommending using so Ubuntu has two lines. One is the long-term support one. So they are called with the numbers plus LTS, which stands for long-term support, and they usually are more stable. I mean, they are kind of the same stable, but they maintain it for many years. So usually it's a 5-year period. So the 18.4 it will be supported until 2023. There is a more kind of a development version of Ubuntu, which is 19 point something. Yeah, point 4. So that's also a bit funny thing with Ubuntu, because they increment the first number with the new versions, but the second number is not kind of the
Year, month.
yeah, exactly. So it's basically year, month when the release was happening, and they usually do April, right? So point 4 happens most of the time. They sometimes have a release in October, so point 10 happens sometimes too. And then this one actually is a proper number. So if they have a patch, if they have a new version, they increment that one properly. Yes, backups. Every year we have students complaining or having issues with losing work because they don't do backups. Make sure you do backups. Make sure you use Git for all your source control and so on. And make sure you configuration files also back yourself, right? So if you spend time configuring things, then put them in version control or back them up. So if something happens and you have to reinstall the system, you have everything kind of streamlined for yourself. Yeah.
Is there any valuable for GitLab structure with respect to the area where you project?
Yeah, we can do that. So as the lectures are hosted on our local GitLab, right? And the GitLab is a proper project management system, and all of you can create projects for yourself, for the course and for your pet projects. To do that, you have to go to a particular group, which is called students. Students. So you use the same URL as the beginning, same as everything else, but then you say students. And if you do that, hopefully you will see slightly different thing than I, and you will have a button saying request access. And then you press the button, I grant you access, and then you can create new projects in this namespace. So you can create as many projects as you want. You have a limit of 2 projects in your personal namespace. So if you don't create a project here, you can create a project in, so if I click new project, I can pick either students or I can pick any of the groups I belong to. And one of the groups I belong to is my personal one, which is Mariusz. So under your personal namespace, you can create 2 projects which are not related to anything, like it's just for you, either to play around or to try things out or whatever, right? And then under students, you can create projects which are for coursework or for this course or for whatever. The ones which are under here, we will clean up probably after 1 or 2 years. The ones which are under your username will be cleaned up when your user is wiped. So maybe 2 years after you graduate or something like this. We will notify you when the projects are about to be cleared up, so you will move it or backup it, archive it or whatever, right? All right. Any questions about this? Yeah. So for anything that you do, you own the copyright, right? So as far as I understand the NTNU rules for the students' work, everything that you do is up to you to decide what copyright you want. If you want a closed license, you just say it's a closed license, everything is mine. If you want an open source license, you say it's under GPL or whatever, and you decide, right? So as far as the rules go, everything you individually do is yours. Everything you do as a group, you have to negotiate with the group, right? You have to decide, okay, let's release it under open source or whatever, because then you share the copyright within the group. That's pretty much it. We do encourage you to use things that you can publish. So you can keep copyright for yourself, but use the work that you're doing, especially project work, to promote yourself, right? So once you have a project here that you think is decent, put it on public GitLab or public GitHub and promote yourself. Say, okay, I've done this, I've done that, I've done those projects, right? Because that helps you later to get a job. So having open source licenses actually is good. It makes your software probably looked more into, and people will kind of notice you, right? But it's entirely up to you. We do encourage open source because it makes life easier for everybody. But if you are kind of, if you want to protect particular intellectual property, or if you're not sure about something, then keep it here and close source it, right? We keep this GitLab relatively private, so you have to be logged in and you have to be a user. We will filter out only NTNU users in this GitLab, so it should be relatively protected. If you want to be super sure that it's protected, then when you click new project, say it's private. If you make a private project, nobody will see it unless you specifically say who is allowed to see your project, right? So you can control the visibility of your projects yourself. Yeah, for management purposes, of course, we have access to everything. Like the admins of the GitLab have access to everything, right? But we don't clone your repos or do stuff with it, right? We only move things into place or kind of clean things if they need to be cleaned. Good thing about our GitLab also is that there is no space limit. So a lot of students who do game projects, they usually have a lot of assets. The projects are sometimes over 2 gig in size. So if you go into GitHub or GitLab, they have space limits per project, right? Here you don't, and also the connectivity is local. So it has some benefits of hosting your own projects here because you have fast network, local network, and you don't really have a space limit. Having said that, if you put like 100 gig of repo, we will kind of ask you why the repo is so huge, right? I mean, we had this issue last year. The server crashed because I will not say names, but someone made a mistake and cloned the entire Unreal Engine Git repository into our local space. Because Unreal Engine is an open source project, you can actually clone the whole thing. And then we ran out of disk space and the server crashed, right? Don't do that. So don't clone huge things just because you can. Yeah, anything else?
Probably in such cases we should actually announce the names, right?
Yeah.
But no, that's cool.
I don't have access to create any project, even though I'm a part of the group.
Right, I will check
I
that.
can only create them in the old.
You could create an old?
Yes, but not with the students.
Weird.
We'll check it out later. That's
Right, yeah. So I will check it out. All right. So how many of you will be doing VirtualBox? Go ahead. How many of you will be doing dual boot? Cool. Perfect.
What's the rest doing?
What's the rest doing?
Native.
Memory
Okay,
stick?
Cool.
Native Linux?
Native. Sounds good.
Yep. All right. Okay. So go ahead. Check the instructions. Once you have Linux sorted, you will install Go. For the Mac people, you can start with this. You can start by installing VirtualBox and to have Linux just in case you need it. Installing Go both on your Mac and on the VirtualBox. And checking if you have Git. And then following up with the Heroku. So we will be around. Yona and us will be, like, you can raise your hand, we will be helping you. Follow the instructions and keep cracking.
So the only thing I eventually want to talk about vertical time cover later.
Maybe you should do now, because then I will stop the stream.
Stop the stream.
because you want to post it under Apple. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. All right.